The colony on Elysium Prime was dying, and no one knew why. Nestled in the shadow of a distant star, this small human settlement had once been a beacon of hope, a place where dreams of new beginnings were supposed to take root. But now, fear ruled every waking moment. The jungle surrounding the colony, lush and vibrant under twin suns, had turned into a nightmare. It swallowed people whole. Governor Leora Venn stood at the edge of what used to be Settlement Delta 7. Her boots crunched over broken glass and twisted metal as she surveyed the wreckage. There were no bodies, just claw marks gouged deep into walls like scars left by some monstrous beast. She clenched her fists tightly, trying to steady herself. Panic wasn't an option, not when so many lives depended on her keeping it together. For weeks, reports had trickled in from outlying areas. Entire families gone without a trace. Patrol units vanishing mid-transmission. At first, everyone thought it was just wild animals native to the planet. But these attacks weren't random. They were calculated, precise. Whatever lurked in the shadows wasn't just hunting. It was learning. Leora turned back toward the command center, a prefab structure hastily erected near the heart of the main colony. Inside, holographic maps flickered weakly above cluttered desks. Scientists pored over data while soldiers paced anxiously, their weapons slung across their shoulders. Everyone looked tired, hollow-eyed, and stretched thin. Supplies were running low, morale even lower. "We can't keep going like this," muttered Captain Elias Drake, the head of security. He leaned against a wall, his face pale beneath streaks of dirt. "Every time we send someone out there, they don't come back. And if we stay here, we're sitting ducks," snapped Dr. Ilara Quinn, a xenobiologist who'd been studying the local ecosystem since arriving months ago. Her voice carried both frustration and desperation. "We need help, Elias. Real help, not more theories or half-baked plans." Leora sighed heavily, rubbing her temples. She hated feeling powerless. As governor, she was supposed to protect her people, not watch them disappear one by one. Yet here she was, staring down the barrel of extinction with no way out. Until today, her gaze fell on the ancient beacon sitting dormant in the corner of the room. It was a relic from Earth's early days of interstellar exploration, a bulky piece of equipment that looked more like a museum exhibit than anything functional. No one had touched it in years, its purpose long forgotten. But now it felt like their only chance. "Activate it," Leora said suddenly, pointing at the device. Head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. "What?" Elias asked, incredulous. "That thing hasn't worked in decades, and even if it does, who says anyone will answer?" "Someone might," Leora replied firmly. "Anyone. We have nothing left to lose." Dr. Quinn hesitated before nodding slowly. "She's right. If there's even a slim chance, we owe it to everyone here to try." With shaking hands, Quinn powered up the beacon. Static crackled through the speakers as the machine warmed up. Then a faint hum filled the air. Finally, a single message began broadcasting. A simple plea for help transmitted across the stars in every known galactic frequency. "To whoever receives this signal, please, help us." Light years away, aboard the warship Ironfang, Commander Cal Vorthak tilted his head as the transmission reached him. His sharp features softened slightly, curiosity flickering behind his cold, calculating gaze. For centuries, the Deathworlders had conquered weaker species, thriving on chaos and destruction. But this call, it was different. It wasn't a cry of defiance or anger. It was raw, unfiltered desperation. Fragile, human. Cale tapped a clawed finger against his armored chestplate, considering. Then, with a growl, he issued orders to his crew. The fleet would investigate. Whether out of duty or intrigue, he couldn't say. All he knew was that something about those fragile voices stirred something buried deep within him. And so, the wheels of fate began to turn. Days passed, but the attacks didn't stop. If anything, they grew worse. The shadowy predators that haunted Elysium Prime seemed to be everywhere now, lurking in the dense jungle, creeping through abandoned settlements, even slipping into fortified bunkers undetected. No one was safe. Panic spread like wildfire among the colonists, and whispers of doom filled every conversation. Governor Leoraven tried her best to keep morale up, but it was a losing battle. She walked through the main colony's central plaza, where survivors huddled around flickering lights powered by dwindling energy reserves. Children clung to their parents, wide-eyed with fear, while adults whispered prayers or curses under their breath. Supplies were running dangerously low. Food, medicine, ammunition, all of it disappearing faster than anyone could replace it. "What do we do, Governor?" asked an elderly man named Jonas, his voice trembling. "How much longer can we hold out?" Leora forced a smile she didn't feel. "We'll find a way," she said firmly, though doubt gnawed at her insides. "Help is coming." But deep down, she wasn't sure if she believed her own words. The beacon had been activated days ago, yet there was still no sign of rescue. Had anyone heard their call? Or were they truly alone? Meanwhile, aboard the colossal warship Iron Fang, Commander Kale Vorthak studied the transmission again. His clawed fingers tapped rhythmically against the armrest of his throne-like command chair as he replayed the desperate plea for help. The human voice echoed through the dimly lit chamber, raw and fragile, a stark contrast to the cold efficiency of his own species. "Why does this matter to you?" growled Therak, Cal's second-in-command and oldest rival. Standing nearly as tall as Cal himself, Therak's scared face twisted into a sneer. "It's just another weak race begging for salvation. Let them die." Cal didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned forward, his glowing amber eyes narrowing thoughtfully. There was something about the message that intrigued him, not just the tone, but the underlying determination. These humans weren't surrendering. Even in their darkest hour, they fought to survive. "They intrigue me," Cal finally said, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Their fragility makes them unpredictable. Weakness often breeds creativity. Perhaps they found a way to endure what others cannot." Therak snorted derisively. "Creativity won't save them from whatever hunts them. And why should we care? This isn't our fight. It becomes our fight when it affects the balance of power in this sector." Cal countered sharply. "If these creatures are capable of wiping out an entire colony, imagine what they could do unchecked. Do you want such a threat roaming free near our borders?" Therak hesitated, clearly annoyed but unable to argue further. Still, discontent simmered among the Deathworlder Council. Many saw the distress signal as either a trap or a waste of resources, but Cal's reputation as a brilliant tactician carried weight, and after hours of heated debate, the decision was made. The fleet would investigate. As the Iron Fang and its escorts approached Elysium Prime, the crew prepared for potential conflict. Massive cannons hummed with latent energy, and squads of heavily armored warriors stood ready to deploy. For the Deathworlders, war was life, and every mission carried the promise of bloodshed. On the surface of Elysium Prime, the colonists watched in awe as the alien fleet descended from the sky. The ships were monstrous, jagged structures that looked more like living organisms than machines. Their dark hulls absorbed sunlight, casting eerie shadows over the landscape. Some colonists cheered, believing salvation had arrived. Others cowered in fear, convinced the newcomers meant only destruction. Dr. Ilara Quinn stared up at the looming vessels, her heart pounding. She had spent years studying alien ecosystems, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. Were these beings saviors or conquerors? When a landing party emerged from the largest ship, clad in menacing armor and armed to the teeth, the crowd fell silent. At the center of the group stood Cal Vorthak, towering above his companions. His presence radiated authority and danger, sending shivers down spines. "I am Commander Cal Vorthak of the Deathworlders," he announced in fluent galactic common, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You called for help. Explain yourselves." For a brief moment, no one spoke. Then Governor Leora stepped forward, her chin held high despite her terror. "Thank you for answering our call," she said evenly. "Our colony is under attack by something. We don't know what it is, but it's killing us. Please, help us survive." Kale studied her carefully, noting the mix of fear and resolve in her expression. He nodded once curtly. "Show me." The arrival of the Deathworlders sent shockwaves through the colony. Their ships loomed like dark mountains in the sky, casting long shadows over Elysium Prime's already tense landscape. For the colonists, it was impossible to tell whether these newcomers were saviors or conquerors. The jagged designs of their vessels looked more predatory than protective, and the warriors who stepped onto the planet's soil radiated menace with every movement. Commander Cal Vorthak led his landing party with an imposing presence. His towering frame, easily 7 feet tall, was encased in battle-scarred armor that gleamed faintly under the twin suns. Claws tipped his gauntleted hands, and his glowing amber eyes scanned the surroundings with a predator's precision. Behind him stood a dozen other Deathworlders, each one equally fearsome, their weapons humming softly as if eager for bloodshed. Governor Leora Venn approached cautiously, flanked by Captain Elias Drake and Dr. Elara Quinn. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. If these beings meant harm, there was little they could do to stop them, but she had to try. "Thank you for coming," Leora began, her voice steady despite the knot of fear tightening in her chest. "We're desperate for help." Kale tilted his head slightly, studying her with unnerving intensity. "You called for aid," he rumbled, his deep voice carrying a tone both commanding and curious. "Explain your situation." Before Leora could respond, a scream pierced the air. Everyone turned toward the sound, a young boy pointing frantically at the edge of the jungle. Emerging from the shadows was one of the creatures that had been terrorizing the colony. It moved with unnatural speed, its sleek black body blending seamlessly with the darkness. Glowing green eyes locked onto the group, and razor-sharp claws glinted in the sunlight. Panic erupted among the colonists, but the Deathworlders reacted instantly. Kale raised a massive arm, signaling his warriors to hold position. Then, with terrifying swiftness, he drew a weapon strapped to his side, a pulsating energy blade, and charged forward. The creature lunged at him, jaws snapping wide enough to swallow a man whole. But Kale sidestepped effortlessly, his movements fluid and precise. With a single swing of his blade, he severed one of the creature's limbs. A guttural roar echoed across the clearing as the beast thrashed wildly, only to be met with another strike from Cal's weapon. Within seconds, the creature collapsed, twitching before going still. Silence fell over the scene. The colonists stared in stunned disbelief, while the Deathworlders stood unfazed, as though such violence was routine. And perhaps it was. Kale turned back to Leora, wiping ichor from his blade with deliberate calmness. "This is what attacks you?" he asked, his tone clinical. "Yes," Leora replied, swallowing hard. "They come at night, mostly. We don't know where they're coming from, or why." Dr. Quinn stepped forward hesitantly, clutching a datapad filled with her research. "These creatures aren't natural," she said quickly, hoping to prove her value. "I've been analyzing samples left behind after attacks. They're engineered. Someone created them." Cal's glowing eyes narrowed as he regarded her. "Engineered? By whom?" "We don't know yet," Quinn admitted. "But whoever did this, they're testing us, pushing us to see how far we can go before breaking." For a moment, Kale said nothing. He glanced at the dead creature, then back at the humans. Despite their obvious fragility, there was something about their determination that intrigued him. These people hadn't given up, even when faced with overwhelming odds. "Very well," he finally said, his voice firm. "We will investigate further. In exchange, you will share everything you know about surviving here." "Agreed?" Leora hesitated, glancing at her companions. Trusting the Deathworlders felt risky, But what choice did they have? Nodding slowly, she extended a hand. Agreed. As the two groups began working together, tentative bonds started forming. Kale assigned some of his warriors to patrol the perimeter, ensuring no more creatures could sneak into the colony. Meanwhile, Dr. Quinn eagerly shared her findings with the Deathworlders, impressed by their advanced technology and tactical expertise. But not everyone was convinced. Captain Drake muttered under his breath about inviting wolves into the fold, while Therak, the Deathworlder second in command, watched the humans with thinly veiled disdain. To him, aiding such weaklings was a waste of time. Still, for now, an uneasy truce held. As night fell over Elysium Prime, the colonists slept a little easier knowing the Deathworlders were watching over them. Little did they realize that their newfound allies carried secrets of their own, and that the true enemy might be far greater than anyone imagined. The uneasy alliance between the colonists and the Deathworlders grew stronger with each passing day, or so it seemed. Under Kale Vorthak's leadership, the warriors took charge of securing the colony's defenses, setting up perimeter patrols and deploying advanced sensors to detect movement in the jungle. Their efficiency was unmatched, but their methods were brutal. Every time one of the shadowy predators emerged from the darkness, the Deathworlders dispatched it without hesitation, leaving behind mangled corpses as grim reminders of their strength. For the humans, this display of raw power inspired both awe and unease. While they appreciated the protection, many couldn't shake the feeling that these towering warriors might turn on them at any moment. Captain Elias Drake voiced his concerns openly during a meeting with Governor Luoraven. "They're not here to help us," he muttered, pacing back and forth in the command center. "They're studying us, like we're some kind of experiment." Leora sighed, rubbing her temples. She understood his fears, but she also knew they had no other options. "Whether they're helping or studying doesn't matter right now," she said firmly. "What matters is that they're keeping those things out of our homes. We can figure out their motives later." Dr. Elara Quinn disagreed with Drake's skepticism. Over the past few days, she'd spent hours working alongside the Deathworlders, analyzing data and sharing insights about the creatures. To her surprise, she found herself drawn to Commander Kale. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was an intelligence behind his glowing eyes, a curiosity that mirrored her own. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, Quinn approached Kale near the edge of the jungle. He stood alone, staring into the darkened trees where the predators often lurked. His armor gleamed faintly under the moonlight, and the faint hum of his weapon suggested he was ready for anything. "Commander," Quinn began hesitantly, clutching her datapad close. "May I ask you something?" Kale turned slightly, acknowledging her presence. "Speak." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Why are you really here? You could have ignored our signal. Why bother helping us?" Kale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gazed into the jungle, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "Your species intrigues me," he admitted. "You are fragile, yet you fight. Weakness does not define you. It drives you. That is rare." Quinn blinked, surprised by his honesty. "And what about your people? Do they share your interest in us?" A low growl escaped Kale's throat, hinting at frustration. "My people value strength above all else. Survival through domination. They see your plight as irrelevant unless it threatens them directly. But you don't." Quinn pressed gently. Kale glanced at her, his amber eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, she thought he might ignore the question entirely. Then softly he said, "Perhaps survival means more than just strength. Perhaps resilience, the will to endure, is equally valuable." Before Quinn could respond, a sudden commotion erupted nearby. Shouts echoed through the night as alarms blared, signaling another attack. Without hesitation, Kale sprinted toward the chaos, his warriors falling into step behind him. Quinn followed closely, her heart pounding as she realized the scale of the assault. This time, the creatures came in waves, dozens of them swarming the outskirts of the colony. The Deathworlders fought with ruthless precision, cutting down the beasts with devastating efficiency. But the sheer number of attackers overwhelmed even their formidable skills. Colonists scrambled to defend themselves, using whatever weapons they could find. Amid the chaos, Quinn noticed something strange. One of the larger creatures carried a metallic device embedded in its chest, a piece of alien technology unlike anything she'd seen before. Risking her life, she darted forward, grabbing the device after Kale felled the beast. Her hands trembled as she examined it, realizing its significance. These creatures aren't just engineered, she whispered to herself. They're controlled. When the battle finally subsided, exhaustion hung heavy in the air. Bodies littered the ground, both human and predator alike, but the colony remained standing. As Quinn showed Kel the device, his expression darkened. Whoever created these monsters wasn't done playing games, and if they wanted answers, they'd need to dig deeper. For the first time, Kale felt a flicker of doubt. Had he underestimated the threat? Or worse, had he led his people into a trap? The metallic device Dr. Elara Quinn had retrieved from the creature's chest became the centerpiece of their investigation. Back in the colony's makeshift lab, she and a team of scientists worked tirelessly to decipher its purpose. Kel Vorthak stood nearby, arms crossed over his massive chest, watching intently as Quinn pried open the alien artifact. His glowing amber eyes flickered with impatience but also curiosity. "This isn't just a weapon," Quinn muttered, her fingers deftly manipulating tools to examine the device. "It's a control mechanism, a way to direct these creatures remotely." Kale growled softly, his claws flexing involuntarily. "Control? By whom?" "That's what we need to find out," Quinn replied, glancing up at him. Her voice carried both determination and unease. "Whoever made this is using those predators like puppets, and if they're willing to unleash them on us, they won't stop until we're wiped out, or worse." Her words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Kale felt the weight of something beyond brute force or survival instincts. This wasn't just about defending the colony anymore. It was about uncovering a larger conspiracy that threatened not only humanity, but perhaps even the Deathworlders themselves. Governor Leora Venn entered the lab, her face pale with exhaustion. She'd spent hours coordinating cleanup efforts after the night's attack, ensuring the wounded received care and morale didn't collapse entirely. Now she looked to Quinn for answers. "What did you find?" Leora asked, her tone sharp with urgency. Quinn held up the device, pointing to intricate circuits embedded within. "These creatures are being controlled by someone, or something, out there. Whoever created them wants to test us, push us to our limits." Leora frowned. "But why? What do they gain from killing us?" Before Quinn could respond, Kale stepped forward. "Testing implies observation. They want to see how you react under pressure, how far you'll go to survive, and what happens when they're done observing." Captain Elias Drake interjected bitterly, leaning against the doorway. His distrust of the Deathworlders hadn't waned, but his anger now extended to whoever orchestrated the attacks. "Do they come in and finish the job themselves?" Cal's gaze shifted to Drake, sharp and unyielding. "If they're capable of creating such weapons, then yes, they may plan to eliminate any survivors personally." A tense silence settled over the room. The implications were clear. The colony wasn't dealing with mindless beasts, but an intelligent adversary playing a deadly game. Survival depended not only on fighting back, but also on finding the source of the threat. Dr. Quinn broke the quiet with a determined tone. "We need to track where these signals are coming from, the ones controlling the creatures. If we can locate their origin, we might be able to shut it down." Kale nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Agreed. But tracking them will require venturing deeper into the jungle. These devices likely connect to a central hub hidden somewhere." Leora hesitated, weighing the risks. "How many people would we need to send? It's too dangerous to go alone." "I'll lead the mission," Kale declared firmly. My warriors excel in hostile environments. We'll take a small team, your scientist, he gestured toward Quinn, and a few soldiers who know the terrain. Drake immediately protested. You're taking one of our best researchers, and possibly leading her straight into a trap. Your alternatives are worse, Kale shot back, his voice low and dangerous. Staying here guarantees more attacks. Moving forward gives us a chance to end this. Reluctantly, Leora agreed. Preparations began swiftly. Supplies were gathered, weapons checked, and plans drawn up. As the group prepared to leave, Quinn approached Cal privately. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Helping us, risking your own people. You don't owe us anything. Cal paused, considering her question. For a moment, his usual stoic demeanor softened. Because survival isn't just about strength, he said finally. It's about understanding weakness and overcoming it. Your species has shown me something I haven't seen before. Resilience, determination, perhaps hope. His words surprised Quinn, stirring emotions she hadn't expected. Before she could respond, Kale turned away, barking orders to his warriors. The mission was set. As dawn broke over Elysium Prime, the combined team ventured into the dense jungle, following faint traces of energy signatures emitted by the control devices. The air grew thick with tension as shadows loomed around them, hiding unseen dangers. Every step brought them closer to answers, but also to greater peril. Unbeknownst to them, their journey would reveal far more than just the location of the enemy's base. It would challenge everything they thought they knew about survival, trust, and the true nature of power. The jungle swallowed them whole. Towering trees with twisted roots formed a labyrinth of shadows, while the humid air clung to their skin like a second layer. The team moved cautiously, every step deliberate, as they followed the faint energy trail left by the control devices. Cal Vorthak led the way, his massive frame cutting through the dense foliage with ease. Behind him trailed Dr. Elara Quinn, clutching her datapad tightly, and a small group of Deathworlder warriors flanked by human soldiers. Tension hung thick in the air. Every rustle of leaves or distant bird call made everyone tense, weapons raised instinctively. They all knew the predators could strike at any moment. But worse than that was the unknown waiting for them at the end of this trail. What kind of enemy controlled these creatures? And what would happen if they found it? Quinn adjusted her glasses nervously, glancing at the readings on her datapad. The signal's getting stronger, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the jungle. We're close. Kale nodded sharply, signaling the group to slow down. His glowing amber eyes scanned the surroundings, alert for danger. He trusted his instincts. They had kept him alive through countless battles. But even he couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister awaited them. As they pushed deeper into the wilderness, the environment began to change. The vibrant greens of the jungle gave way to sickly hues, plants wilting unnaturally as though drained of life. A foul stench filled the air, sharp and metallic, making it hard to breathe. It was clear they were nearing the source of the corruption. This place, it feels wrong, muttered one of the human soldiers, gripping his rifle tighter. His name was Corporal Ryan, a seasoned fighter who rarely showed fear. But now, sweat dripped from his brow, despite the oppressive heat. It is wrong, Quinn replied grimly. Whatever's controlling those creatures isn't just manipulating them. It's poisoning everything around it. This isn't natural. Kale growled softly under his breath. Then we destroy it. Before anyone could respond, movement caught their attention. Shadows darted between the trees, too fast to identify clearly. The predators were watching them, stalking them. But instead of attacking outright, they seemed to be herding the group forward, pushing them toward some unseen destination. They're guiding us, Quinn realized aloud, her voice trembling slightly. They want us to go there. Perfect, Drake muttered sarcastically from the back of the group. Just what we needed. A welcoming committee. Despite the sarcasm, no one laughed. The situation was too dire for humor. As they pressed on, the terrain became increasingly treacherous. Sinkholes dotted the ground, vines tangled like snares, and strange, pulsating growths covered the trees, emitting an eerie glow. It felt less like a jungle and more like the belly of some monstrous beast. Finally, after hours of grueling travel, they reached their destination, a massive structure buried deep within the jungle. Its jagged design resembled the Deathworlder ships, organic yet mechanical, as if it had grown out of the earth itself. Strange symbols etched into its surface pulsed faintly with light, matching the frequency of the control devices. "This is it," Quinn said, her voice hushed with awe and dread. "The source." Cale stepped forward, raising a clawed hand to silence the group. "Stay alert," he ordered, his tone low and commanding. "We don't know what's inside." As they approached the entrance, the ground beneath their feet vibrated faintly, as though the structure itself was alive. Quinn hesitated, glancing at Cale. "Do you think whoever built this is still here?" "I think," Cale replied grimly. "We're about to find out." With that, he pushed open the heavy door, revealing a darkened corridor beyond. The air inside was colder, carrying a sterile scent that clashed with the decay outside. Faint hums of machinery echoed through the halls, accompanied by the occasional skittering sound, like insects scurrying across metal floors. One by one, the team entered, their footsteps echoing ominously. Each step took them further into the unknown, closer to answers, and perhaps closer to their doom. For the first time, even Cale felt a flicker of uncertainty. This wasn't just another battlefield. It was something far more insidious. And somewhere deep within the facility, hidden behind layers of secrecy and malice, waited the architects of this nightmare. The interior of the facility was a labyrinth of cold, metallic corridors bathed in flickering blue light. The air hummed with an unsettling energy, and every step echoed unnaturally loud against the walls. Cale Vorthak led the group cautiously, his glowing eyes scanning for threats while his warriors remained vigilant at his sides. Dr. Ilara Quinn followed closely behind him, clutching her datapad as it picked up increasingly erratic signals from the control devices. "This place, it's alive," Quinn murmured, her voice trembling slightly. She pointed to the walls, which seemed to pulse faintly like veins beneath translucent skin. "It's not just machinery, it's biotechnology fused with something organic." Cale growled softly under his breath. "A hive mind," he said grimly. "Whatever controls this facility is connected to everything here, including those creatures." As they ventured deeper, evidence of experimentation became impossible to ignore. Chambers lined the halls, their glass windows revealing grotesque sights. Half-formed creatures suspended in gelatinous tanks, twisted hybrids of animal and machine, and human-like figures encased in pods, their faces frozen in silent screams. The colonists exchanged horrified glances, while the Deathworlders showed no outward reaction, but even they couldn't hide the tension in their stances. "This is monstrous," Leora whispered, her face pale with disgust. "Who could do such a thing?" Before anyone could answer, the group stumbled upon a central chamber filled with holographic displays and data terminals. Quinn rushed to one of the consoles, her fingers flying over the interface as she accessed the logs. Her expression darkened with each passing second. "It's worse than we thought," she said finally, turning to face the others. "These creatures weren't just engineered. They were bred by someone called the Void Architects." "The Void Architects," Drake repeated, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Never heard of them." "They're bioengineers," Quinn explained quickly. "Experts in creating weapons designed to destabilize civilizations. They test species by unleashing escalating threats until extinction seems inevitable. If you survive, they consider you worthy subjects for assimilation or eradication." Cale's claws flexed involuntarily, his jaw tightening. So this entire attack was a test, to see how humanity reacts under pressure. Quinn nodded grimly. "Exactly. And if we fail, They'll finish the job themselves. A low rumble shook the facility, cutting off further discussion. The lights flickered violently, plunging the group into near darkness before stabilizing again. Moments later, skittering sounds echoed through the halls, dozens of them, growing louder. "They know we're here," Kale growled, drawing his energy blade. "Prepare yourselves." The team formed a defensive circle as mutated predators poured into the chamber, their glowing eyes wild with rage. These weren't the same creatures they'd fought before. These ones were larger, more aggressive, and clearly bred for combat. Their bodies bristled with cybernetic enhancements, making them faster and deadlier than ever. "Stay close," Kale barked, charging forward without hesitation. His blade sliced through the first wave of attackers, leaving trails of ichor in its wake. The Deathworlders followed suit, their brutal efficiency unmatched as they carved through the horde. Meanwhile, the human soldiers fired steadily, taking down any creature that slipped past the warriors' defenses. Dr. Quinn crouched behind a console, clutching her datapad protectively. Despite the chaos around her, she refused to abandon her research. Scanning the room, she noticed a terminal labeled Primary Control Hub. It had to be the source of the signal controlling the creatures. "I found it," she shouted above the din. "If I can shut this down, we might disable all the predators." Kale glanced back at her, his expression fierce. "Do it, but hurry." Dodging claws and teeth, Quinn sprinted toward the terminal, her heart pounding wildly. As she worked frantically to override the system, the remaining predators closed in, forcing Kale and the others to fight even harder to hold them off. Finally, with a triumphant cry, Quinn slammed her hand onto the activation button. The facility shuddered violently as the control hub powered down, severing the connection between the creatures and their masters. One by one, the predators collapsed, lifeless husks twitching on the floor. But the victory was short-lived. A new sound echoed through the chamber, a deep mechanical voice speaking in a language none of them understood. On the far wall, a massive screen flickered to life, revealing a cold, calculating figure observing them silently. "You've meddled where you don't belong," the figure intoned, its tone devoid of emotion. "Now you will face the consequences." Kale stepped forward, his blade raised defiantly. "We'll see about that." The screen flickered ominously, the cold, calculating figure of the Void Architect staring down at them with an expressionless mask. Its voice echoed through the chamber, devoid of emotion but heavy with authority. "You have disrupted our experiment," it declared, its tone as sharp as a blade. "Your interference will not go unpunished." Cal Vorthak stood firm, his glowing amber eyes locked onto the screen. He didn't flinch, even as the architect's words dripped with menace. "Your experiments end here," he growled, his deep voice reverberating through the room. "Whatever you planned for these people, it stops now." The architect tilted its head slightly, studying Cal with unnerving detachment. "You are Deathworlders," it observed, almost amused. "Known for your brutality, your conquests. Yet here you stand, defending a species weaker than yourselves. Why?" Kale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced briefly at Dr. Ilara Quinn, who was still catching her breath after disabling the control hub. Her determination had sparked something in him, something unfamiliar yet undeniable. Turning back to the screen, he responded simply, "Because survival isn't just about strength. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves." The architect paused, seemingly intrigued by his response. Then, without warning, the screen went dark. The facility trembled violently, alarms blaring as red lights bathed the chamber in an ominous glow. "They're initiating a self-destruct sequence," Quinn shouted, frantically scanning her datapad. "We need to get out of here. Now." Kale barked orders instantly, rallying his warriors and the human soldiers. "Move, back the way we came." As they sprinted through the twisting corridors, the facility began collapsing around them. Walls buckled, ceilings crumbled, and strange fluids leaked from ruptured tanks, sizzling where they touched the ground. The air grew thick with smoke and debris, making every step harder than the last. But their escape wasn't without cost. Halfway through the retreat, one of the human soldiers, a young man named Corporal Ryan, stumbled into a sinkhole that opened suddenly beneath his feet. Before anyone could grab him, he disappeared into the abyss below. No time. Cale snapped when someone hesitated. Keep moving. Drake cursed under his breath but obeyed, knowing there was no other choice. Survival meant leaving no one behind, but sometimes sacrifices had to be made. When they finally burst out of the facility, gasping for fresh air, the jungle around them erupted in chaos. More predators emerged from the shadows, drawn by the destruction. But this time, they weren't coordinated or controlled. They were wild, frenzied beasts lashing out blindly. Hold them off, Cale commanded, forming a defensive line with his warriors. The humans joined the fight, firing steadily while the Deathworlders carved through the horde with brutal efficiency. Amid the carnage, tension flared within the Deathworlder ranks. Theric, Cale's second-in-command, stepped forward, his scared face twisted with fury. "This is madness," he roared, pointing an accusatory claw at Cale. "We didn't come here to die for these weaklings. You've lost sight of what we are." Cale turned slowly, his gaze icy and unyielding. "And what are we, Theric? Conquerors, destroyers, or survivors?" Theric sneered, drawing his weapon. "You dishonor us with your softness. If you won't lead properly, then I will." Without hesitation, Cale met the challenge. The two warriors clashed in a brutal duel, their blades sparking as they exchanged blows. Each strike carried the weight of centuries-old traditions and rivalries, but Cale fought with purpose, not just for dominance, but for something greater. Finally, with a powerful swing, Cale disarmed Theric, pinning him to the ground with his foot. Blood trickled from a wound on Cale's side, but his stance remained unshaken. "If you want to lead," he snarled, "you'll have to kill me first." For a moment, Theric glared up at him, hatred burning in his eyes. But then, reluctantly, he lowered his gaze. "Do what you must," he muttered bitterly, "but don't expect loyalty forever." Cale released him, turning back to the battle. His warriors hesitated only briefly before rallying behind him once more. They might question his methods, but none could deny his strength or his resolve. As the final wave of predators fell, the group regrouped near the edge of the jungle. Behind them, the facility collapsed entirely, swallowed by flames and smoke. Exhausted but alive, they stared at the wreckage, knowing the worst was far from over. "We stopped them for now," Quinn said softly, clutching her datapad tightly. "But the architects, they'll come back." Cale nodded grimly, his glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. "Then we'll be ready." The destruction of the facility was only the beginning. As the group returned to the colony, battered but alive, they knew the Void Architects wouldn't let their interference go unanswered. The eerie calm that settled over Elysium Prime felt like the eye of a storm, temporary and deceptive. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound more ominous. Governor Leora Van called an emergency meeting in the command center, where Cale Vorthak stood alongside Dr. Ilara Quinn and Captain Elias Drake. Holographic maps floated above the table, displaying potential escape routes and defensive strategies. But no one believed running would solve anything, not when the Architects' reach extended across the stars. "We need to hit them before they regroup," Cale said firmly, his deep voice cutting through the tense silence. "If we wait for them to strike again, we'll lose everything." Drake frowned, crossing his arms. "And how exactly do you plan to fight beings who can engineer entire armies of monsters?" "We're outmatched." Quinn stepped forward, her datapad glowing softly in her hands. "We use what we've learned against them. Those creatures, they were designed to obey specific commands embedded in their DNA. If we reverse engineer that code, we might be able to turn them against their creators." Cale's amber eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "A bold strategy. Dangerous, but effective if it works." Leora hesitated, glancing at the weary faces around her. "It's risky, but we don't have many options left. Let's do it." Over the next few days, Quinn worked tirelessly in the lab, assisted by both human scientists and Deathworlder engineers. Their collaboration was awkward at first, cultures clashing, methods conflicting, but necessity forged understanding. Slowly, they pieced together a bioweapon capable of rewriting the Predator's genetic programming. Meanwhile, Kale prepared his fleet for battle. The Deathworlders had always thrived on warfare, but this time felt different. Loyalty among his crew remained fractured after Thurak's rebellion, though none dared challenge Kale openly. Still, whispers of dissent spread through the ranks, questioning whether aiding humanity was worth the cost. Finally, the day came. Intelligence gathered from the destroyed facility revealed the location of a nearby Void Architect outpost, a massive orbital station bristling with weapons and guarded by swarms of drones. It was heavily fortified, but Kale saw it as their best chance to strike back. "Here's the plan," Kale announced aboard the Iron Fang, addressing both his warriors and the human soldiers gathered for the mission. "We'll deploy Quinn's bioweapon into the station's ventilation systems. Once inside, it will infect any predators stationed there, turning them loose on the architects. While chaos unfolds, my fleet will engage their defenses, creating an opening for your ground team to infiltrate and destroy the core." "It's suicide," Drake muttered under his breath, earning a sharp glare from Leora. "It's our only shot," she countered. "Are you with us or not?" Drake clenched his jaw, but nodded reluctantly. "I'm with you." As the combined forces launched their assault, the galaxy trembled. The Deathworlder fleet clashed with the Architect Armada in orbit, explosions lighting up the void like fireworks. Kale led the charge personally, his ship weaving through enemy fire with lethal precision. Below, Quinn and a small strike team, including Drake, boarded the orbital station, fighting their way through waves of drones and automated turrets. Inside the station, the air grew thick with tension. Quinn activated the bioweapon, releasing a cloud of nanites programmed to rewrite Predator DNA. Within moments, screams echoed through the corridors as mutated beasts turned on their handlers, tearing through walls and slaughtering anything in their path. Kale monitored the chaos remotely, his expression grim. Phase 1 complete. Now for Phase 2. Quinn and her team reached the central chamber, where Sinera, the lead architect, awaited them. Her cold, mechanical form loomed over them, exuding an aura of superiority. "You think you've won?" she asked mockingly. "This is just another test, one you cannot pass." With no time to waste, Quinn planted explosives around the core while Drake provided cover fire. Outside, Kale fought desperately to hold off reinforcements, his ship taking heavy damage. When the core detonated, the station began collapsing. Quinn and her team barely escaped, racing toward extraction pods as debris rained down around them. In orbit, Kale ordered a full retreat, his fleet limping away as the station exploded in a blinding flash. They had struck a blow, but the war was far from over. The orbital station's destruction lit up the sky above Elysium Prime, a fiery beacon signaling both triumph and sacrifice. The Void Architect's outpost was gone, reduced to drifting debris in the cold vacuum of space. But as the survivors gathered back on the planet's surface, there was no celebration, only quiet reflection. The cost of victory weighed heavily on everyone. Governor Leora Venn stood at the edge of the colony, gazing upward at the fading glow of the explosion. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together, trying to steady herself. Too many lives had been lost, not just soldiers, but innocent colonists who had hoped for a better future. Yet, amidst the grief, there was also hope. For the first time since the attacks began, the shadow over Elysium Prime felt lighter. Behind her, Commander Kel Vorthak approached cautiously, his massive frame silhouetted against the twin suns. His armor bore fresh scars from the battle, and his glowing amber eyes reflected a mix of exhaustion and resolve. Your people are safe, for now, he said, his deep voice softer than usual. But this is not the end. Leora nodded slowly, turning to face him. I know, the architects will return. But we've proven something today, that even the weakest can fight back when they stand together. Kale studied her for a moment, then glanced around at the battered but determined faces of the colonists. Humanity's resilience continued to surprise him. Perhaps strength wasn't measured solely by power or dominance. Perhaps it lay in the ability to endure, adapt, and protect what mattered most. Dr. Ilara Quinn joined them, her datapad tucked under one arm. She looked exhausted but proud, her mind already racing with ideas for future research. We've taken their weapon and turned it against them, she said, her voice tinged with awe. That gives us an edge if they come back. It also makes you a target, Kale warned, his tone grave. The architects won't forget this defeat. They'll see humanity, and anyone who aids you, as a threat. Quinn met his gaze unflinchingly. Then let them come. We're ready. As the days passed, the Deathworlder fleet prepared to depart. Repairs were underway on the Iron Fang, and Theric still simmered with resentment, though he kept his distance from Kale. The rift within the Deathworlders remained, but Kale's leadership had earned him newfound respect, even among those who once doubted him. Before leaving, Kale sought out Quinn one last time. They stood near the jungle's edge, where the predators had once hunted so mercilessly. Now, the air felt peaceful, almost serene. You've changed me, Kale admitted quietly, his words surprising even himself. I came here seeking answers, but I found something else instead, a reason to question everything I believed about survival. Quinn smiled faintly, touched by his honesty. And you've given us hope. That's something worth fighting for. Kale nodded, extending a clawed hand. If you ever need us again, call. The Deathworlders may not be allies in name, but we will answer. With that, he turned and walked away, his warriors following silently behind him. As the ships ascended into the sky, the colonists watched in silence, unsure whether to feel relief or apprehension. But one thing was certain, humanity had earned its place among the stars. In the weeks that followed, life on Elysium Prime began to rebuild. Governor Venn worked tirelessly to restore order, while Dr. Quinn dedicated herself to studying the remnants of the architect's technology. Though the galaxy remained vast and dangerous, the colony now stood united, not just as survivors, but as pioneers. Far beyond the reaches of human space, aboard the Iron Fang, Kale stared out at the endless expanse of stars. He had always believed strength defined greatness. Now, he understood that compassion and cooperation held equal value. And perhaps, just perhaps, the universe was better for it. As the ship disappeared into the void, a new chapter began, not just for humanity, but for all who dared to dream of a brighter tomorrow.